How do 7 of the most dangerous men in America walk right through the front gate of a maximum security prison in broad daylight? No tunnels. No explosions. Just a very clever lie. This is the Texas 7 escape, the most audacious breakout in history. And today, in 2026, the psychology behind this case is scarier than the escape itself. Most of these men are now on death row, but the story isn't over. As you watch this, one of them is fighting for a new trial because of a secret a judge kept for 20 years. How did a group of model prisoners become America's most wanted? And how did a simple lunch break lead to a tragedy that changed Texas forever? To understand the Texas 7, you have to understand their leader, George Rivas. He didn't use muscles, he used math. He realized that at exactly 11:20 a.m., the guards at the John B. Connelly Unit got tired. They were hungry for lunch. They were bored. Rivas turned that boredom into a weapon. He spent 6 months acting like a perfect inmate just to get into the one room the cameras couldn't see. By the time the guards realized the perfect prisoner was gone, it was already too late. They weren't just running, they were hunting. Inside the John B. Connelly Unit, there was a dead zone. A room where the surveillance AI of 2026 would have caught them in seconds, but in the year 2000, it was a room of total silence. The maintenance shop. Here, George Rivas and his crew weren't just inmates, they were trusted workers. Rivas had spent months studying the guards' habits. He knew that during lunch, the shop became a ghost town. The plan was simple but terrifying. They didn't storm the room with guns, they lured people in. One by one, 13 guards and civilian workers walked into the shop. Rivas greeted them with a calm voice, saying, "I just want to go home." They were tied up, gagged, and tucked away in an electrical room. The logistics were perfect. Within minutes, the inmates had what they needed, uniforms. By wearing the guards' clothes, they became invisible. This is where Rivas showed his true mastermind status. He picked up the phone and called the prison's high-security guard tower. He pretended to be a supervisor. He told the guard, "We're sending someone up to install new security cameras." In a prison, nobody questions a camera installer. Rivas walked right up to the tower, took control, and suddenly, the inmates own the eyes of the prison. But here is the moral pivot that has Texas talking in 2026. One of the men in that room was Randy Halprin. For 20 years, he sat on death row, waiting for the needle. But in late 2024, everything changed. It was discovered that the judge who sentenced him used horrific slurs and hated him before the trial even started. Was this a fair punishment or a broken system? While the men were stealing guns from the armory, the legal system was already starting to fracture. It was almost noon. The Texas sun was hot, and the guards at the front gate were thinking about their lunch. They saw the white maintenance truck pull up. They saw a guard they didn't recognize, but he had the right uniform and the right ID. What they didn't see was the Plywood Trick. 5 of the most dangerous men in Texas were curled up in the back of that truck, buried under a heavy sheet of wood and piles of trash. They were inches away from the guards, holding their breath in total darkness. This was the heart-pound moment. If one guard had asked to move that plywood, the escape would have ended in a shootout. But George Rivas had picked his team perfectly. He knew that if you look like you belong, people stop asking questions. He used a stolen radio to confirm his own exit. The gate arm lifted. The truck rolled forward. In broad daylight, with 2,000 inmates locked behind them, the Texas 7 simply drove away. They left a note behind, "You haven't heard the last of us yet." They weren't just running for the border, they were planning a crime spree that would lead them to a sporting goods store on Christmas Eve. But while they were tasting freedom for the first time in years, the system was already starting to crumble. Here is the 2026 moral pivot that makes this story legendary. Because of the law of parties, every single one of these men was sentenced to death, even the ones who didn't pull a trigger. But in November 2024, the courts found out that the judge who sentenced Randy Halprin was secretly biased. He didn't just want justice, he wanted a win for his own personal prejudices. Now, in 2026, the state has to decide, can you execute a man if the trial was poisoned from the start? On December 24, 2000, the world was at home. In Irving, Texas, the air was sharp and cold. Inside Oshman's Sporting Goods, 16 employees were finishing their shifts, looking forward to Christmas morning. They didn't know that 7 men, who had just pulled off the greatest escape in Texas history, were watching them from the shadows of the loading dock. George Rivas didn't just walk in. He used audacity. The men wore stolen security jackets, pretending to be ADT technicians. They walked in like they owned the place. They didn't scream, they gave orders with professional calm. Within minutes, 16 employees were marched to a back room, their hands bound with the escarity of heavy-duty duct tape. The logistics: Rivas needed 2 things: money and firepower. They emptied the safe, $70,000, and began smashing glass cases to take 44 high-caliber firearms. They weren't just fugitives anymore, they were an army. Officer Aubrey Hawkins was 29 years old. He had just finished Christmas Eve dinner with his wife and son at a nearby restaurant. When the call came in for a suspicious circumstance at Oshman's, he was less than a mile away. He arrived first. This is where the competence paradox turned into a nightmare. As Hawkins' patrol car pulled into the backloading dock, he was caught in a kill zone. He didn't even have time to unholster his weapon. The gory logistics, the barrage. The inmates didn't just fire one shot. They opened fire from multiple angles with stolen semi-automatic weapons. The impact: Hawkins was struck 11 times. The final brutality: as the Texas 7 fled in their stolen Suburban, they didn't just drive away. They drove over the mortally wounded officer. In the world of true crime documentaries, this is the moral pivot. The audience, who might have been impressed by their clever prison break, now sees the survival instinct at its most primitive and cruel. The mastermind, Rivas, was no longer a genius. He was a killer. To understand why this case is trending in 2026, you have to understand the Texas Law of Parties, Section 7.02. In most states, if you are the getaway driver and your friend kills someone, you might get a long prison sentence. But in Texas, if you should have anticipated that a murder could happen, you get the death penalty. The controversy: Randy Halprin was inside the store, gathering clothes. He claimed he never fired a gun. Patrick Murphy was in the car, acting as a lookout. Yet, because of the law of parties, the state of Texas said, "You were part of the group. You are just as guilty as the man who pulled the trigger." For years, this was the end of the story. But in 2024 and 2025, the economic shadow of this case shifted. In November 2024, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals did something shocking. They granted Randy Halprin a new trial. But because the original judge, Vickers Cunningham, was exposed for having actual bias. He wasn't just a tough judge, he was a man who used horrific anti-Semitic and racist language in private. He reportedly told people he wanted to sentence the Texas 7 to death because of who they were, not just what they did. The 2026 impact: this has created a structural violation of the law. If the judge is poisoned, the whole trial is invalid. This is your high-impact SEO hook. Can you execute a man for an escape gone wrong if the judge was the one breaking the rules of fairness? This is the brutal versus high-tech contrast for your video. The primitive, the brutal, 19th century style murder of an officer in a dark alley. The high-tech, 2026, the use of AI emotion analysis and forensic gate tracking that modern prisons now use to ensure a Texas 7 never happens again. The Texas 7 thought they were ghosts. They thought they had disappeared into the economic shadow of America. But by killing Officer Hawkins, they didn't just escape a prison, they built a new one for themselves. A cage of national hatred that would eventually lead to the largest manhunt in U.S. history. At 8,465 feet, the air is thin. Every breath feels like a choice. This is Woodland Park, Colorado. In January 2001, it was the perfect place to disappear. The Texas 7 had driven nearly 1,000 miles from the blood-stained loading dock in Irving. They had $70,000 in stolen cash and a small army's worth of weapons hidden in the cabinets of their new $45,000 RV. They weren't inmates anymore. In their minds, they were ghosts. To blend in, George Rivas used his greatest weapon, audacity. He didn't try to look like a tough guy. He did the opposite. He told the owners of the Coachlight RV park that they were a group of Christian missionaries from Texas. They spent their days being too nice. They helped neighbors with their groceries. They talked about the good word. They even used their stolen money to buy local residents meals. Rivas knew that in a small, religious mountain town, a Bible is a better shield than a bulletproof vest. Here is the survival code the Texas 7 broke. In a prison, you survive by being invisible. In the real world, you survive by being normal. But the Texas 7 were high-functioning fugitives. They were so addicted to their missionary characters that they started playing their Christian music too loud. They were trying too hard to be seen as good people. To their neighbor, Wayne and Jana, something felt off. Why were 7 grown men living in one RV? Why did they never leave at the same time? Why was their music always blaring as if they were trying to drown out the sound of their own conversations? In 2001, a suspicious neighbor was more dangerous to an inmate than a 2026 AI tracking satellite. On January 20, 2001, the ruse shattered. The neighbor was watching America's Most Wanted. When the faces of the Texas 7 flashed on the screen, the neighbor didn't see missionaries. He saw the men who had murdered Officer Aubrey Hawkins. He saw the mastermind, George Rivas. He saw the childinger, Randy Halprin. The logistics of the tip were chillingly simple. The neighbor didn't call the local police. He called the AMW hotline. Within hours, the FBI, the Texas Rangers, and the SWAT teams were descending on the quiet, snowy town of Woodland Park. The missionaries were about to meet the law. On January 22nd, the trap snapped shut. Rivas, Rodriguez, and Garcia were cornered at a nearby convenience store. Rivas, the man who had planned the perfect escape, didn't even reach for his gun. He knew the math. He was surrounded. The gory logistics. Back at the RV park, the scene was a war zone. Randy Halprin was arrested without a fight, his missionary cover literal trash on the floor. But inside the RV, Larry Harper chose a different path. While the police shouted through bullhorns, Harper sat in the back of the Coachman Royal, surrounded by stolen guns. He didn't want to go back to a Texas cage. He ended his own life with a single shot before the doors could be breached. The last 2, Patrick Murphy and Donald Newberry, fled to Colorado Springs. They holed up in a Holiday Inn, creating a 20-hour standoff that paralyzed the city. This is the audacity peak. Murphy didn't want to surrender to a cop. He wanted to surrender to a TV camera. He demanded a live interview to tell his side of the story. In 2026, we see this as the first viral fugitive moment. They knew they were caught, so they turned their capture into a media event. They walked out with their hands up, but only after they knew the whole world was watching. As we close Act 4, we have to look at the justice paradox. While 4 of these men have been executed, Randy Halprin is still alive in February 2026. The world remembers him as a Texas 7 member, but the 2024/2025 rulings have changed the narrative. It turns out that Judge Vickers Cunningham, the man who sent them to death, was keeping a dark secret. He viewed the Jewish Halprin and the other inmates through a lens of extreme bigotry. The 2026 legal status. Because the judge was poisoned, Halprin's death sentence was thrown out in late 2024. As you watch this video, the state of Texas is preparing for a new trial in 2026. The question for your viewers to debate in the comments: is a man guilty because of the crime, or is he innocent because the judge broke the law first? The Texas 7 escape didn't just end in Colorado. It changed the economic shadow of the American justice system forever. Texas spent millions on the manhunt, and millions more on the death row appeals that have lasted over 2 decades. But in 2026, the bill for this escape is finally coming due in a way no one expected. 4 of the men have already been executed. But Randy Halprin remains. As of February 2026, his case has become a global scandal. We now know his original trial was poisoned by a judge who harbored extreme personal biases. This creates the ultimate moral dilemma. If a man is part of a group that kills a police officer, does he still deserve a fair trial, even if the judge is a bigot? Today, the Connelly Unit has AI surveillance that makes a front gate escape impossible. But technology can't fix a broken trial. So, I have to ask you, should Randy Halprin be executed for his role in the Texas 7, or should the judge's bias set him free? Let me know in the comments.